The longer this goes on, the worse it starts to look. I am Dr. Philip McMillan. I'm a physician. I've been looking at COVID since early 2020. I have some different perspectives on what has happened in the pandemic, and truthfully, I believe I can explain almost every aspect of what happened in COVID 19. If you're interested, please look in the description below for the advanced course, which covers every aspect up until now. But what am I talking about now? I'm making reference to a recent discussion that was held in relation to the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, ACIP. And before I show you the clip, which was taken from X, and it looks at a discussion between two people in the panel. And so what I'll do is I'll help to build some context for you so that you understand what is happening and what it's about. So to start you off, I'll let you listen to the first bit of this presentation, and it's from Human Perspective. I like to always highlight where I've seen this. And this is a clip, and he put in the subtitles. So here is what they were saying, and I'll come back to it. Just listen first.
Thank you. One of the reasons I brought that out is because a few years ago, even coming from the CDC, where if you get the vaccine, you won't get COVID. And so early studies that were done is that you didn't even test people with COVID-like illnesses if they were vaccinated. You only tested the unvaccinated because the assumption was in the medical community that it prevented infection.
I'll just pause you right here. Now, you can see where this conversation is going straight off. And you can imagine that this is not a typical conversation that would have occurred in this grouping. And so in order for you to understand, you have to realize what has recently happened in terms of the transition of this grouping of people, this group of people, and why they are able to have this kind of discussion in what was previously a very strongly narrative controlled group of scientists. So that's the first thing you have to notice. This is a different kind of conversation. Now, it's important for you to get the background. So up until June of 2025, and this is the CDC archive, again, the ACIP committee members, up to June 9th, 2025, they then go through a list of people. The chair was Helen Talbot, professor of medicine. They look at the voting members. You hear a professor of pediatrics, professor of public health, chief medical officer. This one was Chen was in travel medicine, professor of medicine again, associate professor of medicine and pediatrics. So you can see that this is a cohort who normally make decisions about the vaccine schedule. And one of the things that has come up out of the pandemic has been whether or not this was appropriate. And essentially, they're challenging whether or not they are acting in the interest of the public. And that's fundamentally where RFK comes from. And so what he then did is he fired all the members of the ACIP, and then he has replaced them with new members. And so again, you have to understand that this is updated on the 16th of September, 2025. And again, it shows you who is involved. There's Hillary Blackburn. She is in terms of direction of medication access. You have Evelyn Griffiths, an obstetrician. You have Hilbert Hiblin. He was a psychiatrist, neuroscientist, is Martin Kulderoff, biostatistician. He was involved in terms of the Great Barrington Declaration against lockdowns. Retzef Levi, he is from MIT in healthcare analytics. Robert Malone, vaccine expertise, scientist, biochemistry. In effect, Robert Malone was how do I phrase this properly? He first conceptualized the idea of mRNA vaccines. It gets people very upset when I say he was the inventor of it. But when it comes to the conceptualization of it and the early testing, it came through him and his lab while he was still a student. I happened to interview him on the details around that. But it gets a lot of angst when you mention him because he wasn't supportive of the narrative. And as you can see, a lot of the people who are currently made up in the ACIP are not. So Robert Malone was a very big one that they were upset about. You have Cody Meissner, professor of pediatrics, and then you have Kirk Milhoan. So he's a doctor, PhD, pediatric cardiologist, former US Air Force flight surgeon. So he is the person who was pointing out this question, and he's going to talk about myocardial inflammation. And the reason he is relevant is because he is also, in a sense, what you have to understand is that I usually ask myself, what were the views of these people prior or during the pandemic? Where did they stand? Because it's likely to give you an idea as to what they think. And so in terms of Kirk, he is still part of Independent Medical Alliance, which was FLCCC. And so he's involved in terms of trying to help people with spike protein damage, cardiovascular toxicity due to the spike protein. So you know exactly where he stands. He was not on the side of the narrative. He was clearly asking questions before. And so you see the situation now where when he is placed in that environment, he is bringing his expertise, his experience, his questions in a way that is challenging the narrative. So with that background, let us start again and make sure you can see it from the start. Let's go again. Listen to this.
Thank you. One of the reasons I brought that out is because a few years ago, even coming from the CDC, where if you get the vaccine, you won't get COVID. And so early studies that were done is that you didn't even test people with COVID-like illnesses if they were vaccinated. You only tested the unvaccinated because the assumption was in the medical community that it prevented infection. But I think all of us know that it's very hard to prevent a respiratory infection with an injectable vaccine because of the lack of IgA immunity.
Pause there a second. I just like to say I was one of the early advocates. In 2021, that was my argument. I was saying you are unlikely to stimulate mucosal immunity with an injectable vaccine, and you will therefore not stop this virus. I ended up being censored for saying that kind of thing. Just had to stick that in. But anyway, let's go on.
One last thing. Before medicine career, I had a PhD in pharmacology. And I guess I'm shocked at the lack of pharmacological rigor in dosing, dose timing, dose accumulation, how long that dose lasts, and what are the pharmacokinetics of a biologic making a biologic. And so when the question is asked of, okay, so as a cardiologist, I see the spike protein as cardiotoxic. I want to know how long that a biologic has made a biologic, and how long it's going to last. Oh, it goes away quickly. Then we have the recent Yale study that showed femtomoles of spike protein basically until they stopped the assay. So my comment is I am really confused about the pharmacologic rigor for this product before it was released. And now with evidence of contamination, why is this not pulled off like any other biologic or medicine that is found They have
going,
contamination.
he is specifically calling for it to be pulled off the market. That's his perspective because of his research, his experience with dealing with biologics or pharmacological products. And essentially what he's saying is that normally, if you're using a new drug, you want to know the pharmacokinetics. That means after it's ingested, say for instance, a tablet, where does it spread in the bloodstream? What's the concentration? What's the half-life? How long does it last for? Where is it eliminated? Is it the kidneys? Is it the liver? Is it? And so you want all of that information as you're trying to work out the safety of the product. And so what he was pointing out there is that that kind of study on the pharmacokinetics with lipid nanoparticles was not adequately done in his opinion. And he mentioned something at the end with regards to contaminants, and that's because a recent study had come out showing that the mRNA vaccines had extra bits in them, like DNA plasmids and SV40 promoters and so on, things that shouldn't be in them. And the argument is whether or not they are at adequate levels. And so those are the questions that he was putting in the ACIP meeting. And as what I'm saying is that kind of question would not have been asked before. And so it shows you that there is a transition in the way that they're thinking. Let's now then hear what the response was.
Is response to that?
That would be a question for the manufacturers or FDA.
Or FDA. Crazy question.
Yeah.
Dr. Hood?
Yes. Hey, can you hear me? Tracy Beth Hogue from the FDA.
Yes.
So I will say that some of the information is proprietary information, and I will say though the information that we have been provided by Pfizer and Moderna and what was shared with me, what they provided to the FDA was within the regulatory limits, I will also acknowledge that this is something we take very seriously, and I want to sincerely thank the independent researchers.
I'm just going to pause you here a minute. And so again, it's important to get context. Who is Tracy and why is she there, so to speak? So what I've done is that I've got the House government documents to the House in the US, Senate and House, of her CV to show you why she's in the position that she's in. And so this is her CV, and her title is Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation Specialist, Epidemiology. And as you can see, she did interventional spine and sports medicine, rehabilitation. She had expertise in kidney function and retinal cuticular Dresden in Denmark, as well as a public health and epidemiology PhD. So in the context of her role, so she is now in the role of the FDA, but this is a recent appointment. And so she's another one of the people who they didn't particularly like getting this kind of position, because you have to remember they switched around a lot of the people who were in these positions and brought in people who were challenging the narrative. And as you can see, how I usually know that this is someone that they don't particularly like is because this is a hit post showing her that the new FDA aid has often unproven stem cells. They're arguing about her clinic and so on. And when they're doing that, they're trying to discredit the person. She is brought in, the new FDA commissioner has brought her in as a special assistant in a unique position. As you say, she has had some controversial views on COVID, skeptical of certain elements of vaccination, masking, and school closing. So you know where this is going. And so it's important to understand that's who she is, and that's her background, where she was coming from, And so then when you're listening to it, you can understand that she's new to the post and therefore trying to give some clarity from what she has heard. So let's continue to listen.
Of whom I know who have brought this issue to the public's attention. And at the FDA, we take the public's safety and, you know, the safety of these products incredibly seriously. And I just want to give you all that message that this is not something that is being ignored. And I can only, you know, provide with you the information that I have been given about what the sponsors provided us regarding the DNA levels in their products. And so that I think that I'm going to stop with that.
Dr.
And so what she's highlighting there is that the sponsors or the manufacturers presented the FDA with data, and the FDA took that data to then assume that this was correct. And part of the challenge is, was there independent testing? Did the FDA go and check for themselves whether or not this was within regulatory limits? Now, some people may argue that the FDA never did this at all in the first place. I'm not sure what they do as standard practice, so I can't necessarily say that this is the standard practice or not. However, I would presume, and this is my thinking, if you are giving this to billions of people, you've had time, there should have been parallel animal studies, there are so many other things that could have been done that it seems were not done. And I think it's because they all assumed this would work perfectly. This was not supposed to happen, where there are even questions coming up. Let's listen to the end of this discussion here.
Do we have a comment from Pfizer or Moderna? And please state name and company.
Can I ask another quick question of Dr. Hogue?
Please do.
Dr. Hogue, are there any plans for post-production about independent evaluation by the FDA?
So I'll say that is something that's being discussed, and we want to communicate that we take this issue very seriously, and thank everyone who has brought this to our attention.
So yes, as I said, the point there that she was making is that independent researchers have been looking at vials, looking at contaminants. They're not paid to do this. They get no funding for do this. They have no support to do this, but they have been doing it anyway. And this is then what has been brought back to the FDA, and it has forced them to acknowledge that they hadn't independently looked themselves, and they therefore trusted the manufacturers to give them accurate information. Now, based on history, I am sure that pharmaceutical companies never do anything that is questionable. They are a paragon of perfection, and they rarely ever do anything that would... I'll stop at that point because you know what I'm doing with regards to the sarcasm. So the point is that there should have been independent testing. And what is very interesting is that this should have happened globally. So it's one thing for the FDA not to do it, but it's a completely different question for every single country to follow suit. And what it seems to have happened here is that nobody in Europe, in the UK, in Australia, nobody seems to have done any independent testing to check for regulatory standards in terms of contaminants either. And so this is where we are today. I think fundamentally, as I reflect on it, because as I say, most of the people who are involved are not actually getting any direct benefit from it. And so you would ask, why is it that it almost feels as though they're covering up? Well, here is my thought. I think that there was such powerful cognitive dissonance in terms of the push and the safety and everything else that everybody in those industries just assumed this would work perfectly, there would be no issues, and this situation where they're having to go back and acknowledged that there were gaps would never have happened. It really was a gamble. I could have told them early in 2021, based on the science, that you shouldn't gamble because there were so many questions that needed to be answered that if you chose to not do it, it's likely to blow up in your face. And this is fundamentally what has happened in the US. It has blown up. RFK is in position now, whether they like it or not. He has always been questioning the safety of vaccines, all vaccines, so it's not just the COVID vaccines. And so this has a direct impact on the pharma industry because now this is going to damage their ability or their confidence moving forward with regards to vaccines. My final thought on this is, whilst I think that we do have to get some of these questions answered, I do question whether or not we are throwing out the baby with the bathwater. And what that means is that when you think about removing all of the ACIP members, it means you've lost a degree of history in terms of how the organization was run, the systems, the governance, the little things that you just may not know. And I feel that they should have held a proportion of them, at least probably 40%, even if they were resistant to what you're doing, just because they have the history of how things had worked and how things could be aligned. Now, I don't know if I'm right or wrong. I just know that it's not easy to get change and to have a smooth transition when you have changed everybody involved in the system. So it's going to be a challenge for the US. It's going to be a challenge in terms of regulation, in terms of their reputation as well internationally. And they will have to work that through. The question is going to be, will it be that other countries continue along as they have done before and somebody else takes the lead, like in Europe? Or will they use this as an opportunity to actually reflect carefully on the way things have been done and try and get it better the next time? That would be, I think, something that we will see in time. But let's hope that the future is brighter. Have a great evening.
A hero, an immune adventure. Humming Heroes, your lyrical guide to the body's defenders. Now on Amazon. Check the links below.